The story of Delta Flight 237 begins, like any ordinary commercial journey across the American sky, a route flown thousands of times without incident, disruption, or memory. On the morning of August 14, 2019, the aircraft, a Boeing 737-800, departed from Seattle-Tacoma International Airport with the same routine confidence that defines modern aviation. Pilots joked lightly as they prepared the pre-flight checklist. Passengers slid comfortably into their seats, unaware that they were boarding a flight destined to become one of the most disturbing and enigmatic events in American aviation history. Nothing in the manifest suggested danger. Nothing in the weather forecast warned of turbulence. Nothing in the maintenance logs hinted at malfunction. Yet, within hours, Flight 237 would descend into a silence so complete, so unnatural, that it would haunt investigators, pilots, and families for years to come. At 10,000 feet, everything seemed normal. Radar tracked the plane steadily. Communication towers received crisp, clear responses. The pilot reported smooth air, stable winds, and optimal cruising conditions. Flight attendants served the first round of drinks. A passenger in seat 14B sent a message to his wife. "Just boarded, all good. See you in Atlanta tonight." Another snapped a photo of the mountain ranges below. Nothing, absolutely nothing, suggested that Flight 237 was already drifting toward the impossible. But unknown to the passengers, unknown even to the pilots, something had begun inside the aircraft's internal systems. A silent anomaly. A shift so small, it didn't trigger alarms, didn't flash warnings, didn't break the routine. Something that would soon disconnect the plane from the world above and the people inside it from everything they knew. At 34,000 feet, Flight 237 went radio silent. No last words. No distress call. No malfunction report. Just silence. Air traffic control attempted routine check-ins. No answer. They repeated the call. Still nothing. Pilots sometimes missed a call due to cockpit workload, but not for more than a minute. Not for more than 5. Not for 20. Soon, controllers attempted emergency channels. When there was still no response, standard protocol initiated. The plane was placed under observation for possible communication failure. But even that didn't trigger concern yet. Aircraft lose radio contact occasionally. Systems reset, channels switch. It happens. But then something else occurred. Something far more disturbing. Passenger phones stopped connecting to towers. Wi-Fi devices inside the plane stopped pinging the aircraft router. GPS signatures coming from personal electronics faded into nothing. From the ground, Delta 237 was still visible on radar. It still reflected. It still flew at altitude. But digitally, technologically, it had dropped out. It was as if the passengers no longer existed electronically, as if the entire cabin had gone dark. But the plane continued, flying, calm, level, silent. At this point, the FAA initiated what would later be known as the first silence window, a period of 27 minutes in which Delta 237 continued on its path, but showed no signs of life from anyone on board. As if time inside the cabin had stopped, or as if the plane was flying itself through an empty sky. Fighter jets were prepared but not yet scrambled. Protocol required further verification. Controllers attempted one last check-in before escorting. Delta 237, respond. Nothing. Delta 237, this is FAA Atlanta Center. Do you copy? Silence. Delta 237, acknowledge. More silence. Then came the moment that changed everything. Without warning, Delta 237 broke from cruising altitude and initiated a perfectly controlled descent toward Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. No drift, no deviation, no sign of struggle, not even a change in engine tone. Just a clean, precise downward glide, as if guided by an invisible pilot. Controllers assumed the autopilot had engaged a programmed approach due to a system malfunction, but the descent path was too perfect, too calculated. Commercial autopilot systems cannot initiate unplanned landing sequences without cockpit input. Someone had to command it. Someone had to take control. Yet there was no one speaking, no door opening, no cockpit movement visible on external sensors. Nothing. The descent was smooth, steady, almost beautiful in its precision. But inside the airport's control tower, fear was rising. A pilotless plane cannot land itself. Not like that. Not intentionally. Not flawlessly. Controllers authorized full emergency response. The runway was cleared. Fire crews lined the pavement. Medical teams positioned near the taxi lanes. Police vehicles surrounded the perimeter. The entire airport slowed to a crawl as Delta 237 continued descending in absolute silence. At 3,000 feet, the aircraft rolled left gently, aligning itself perfectly with runway 27R. At 2,500 feet, flaps extended at the exact optimal angle. At 500 feet, landing gear deployed with textbook timing. Someone was flying this plane. Someone who never spoke. Someone who never responded. Someone who followed every procedure with machine-like perfection. When the aircraft touched down, the landing was so smooth, the runway sensors recorded it as super soft, a maneuver typically performed only by senior captains with decades of experience. The plane decelerated evenly, taxi lights switching on automatically. Then it rolled calmly toward the nearest taxiway and stopped. Engines idling, beacon lights flashing, systems functioning normally. But still, no one inside moved. Emergency crews approached cautiously. Their radios crackled with tension. Firefighters walked alongside the fuselage, expecting smoke, expecting chaos, expecting shattered windows or panicked passengers. What they found instead froze them where they stood. Every window was dark. Every seat was empty. Every overhead bin open. Every bag abandoned. Every cockpit instrument active. Every system online. But the plane had no pilot, no co-pilot, no crew, no passengers. Delta Flight 237 had landed itself. When emergency responders opened the cabin door, it swung freely, unlocked, unblocked, undamaged. They stepped inside cautiously, flashlights trembling as they scanned the aisle. The cabin was pristine, seatbelts neatly arranged, drinks still placed on tray tables, a child's stuffed toy on the floor, phones in seats, bags in overheads. Everything was exactly where humans left them. But the humans were nowhere. No fingerprints on tray tables, no footprints in the aisle, no signs of struggle, no signs of evacuation, nothing. Just a perfectly clean, perfectly quiet airplane that had flown itself into the busiest airport in the world. Investigators called it impossible. The media called it paranormal. The government called it classified. And families called it a nightmare from which no one ever woke. Inside the hangar, where Delta 237 was towed after its impossible landing, investigators moved like surgeons, walking into an operating room where the patient was gone but the heartbeat still echoed. No one understood how a fully intact aircraft could land with 0 people on board, yet maintain perfect control from cruising altitude to taxiway alignment. By the time federal agents arrived, the airport police had already sealed the area. The runway lights still reflected off the aircraft's skin, giving it an eerie, ghost-like shine. The Boeing 737 sat motionless, like it had completed its duty and was now waiting quietly for judgment. But the real nightmare began when investigators stepped into the cockpit. The cockpit was pristine, every switch in its correct place, the throttle set to idle. The autopilot disengaged after landing, exactly as a pilot would do. But the most disturbing detail was the captain's seat. The seatbelt was unbuckled, the armrests lowered, and the chair was pulled slightly backward, as if someone had just been sitting there minutes before landing. Yet no one was there. No fingerprints on the yoke, no sweat on the seat leather, no biological trace of a human presence. It was the cockpit of a plane that had been flown, but not by humans. Investigators moved quickly to retrieve the flight recorders, the cockpit voice recorder, and the flight data recorder. The black boxes would reveal everything: the pilot's last words, the crew's responses, the passengers' reactions. Everyone expected chaotic audio, screaming, alarm sounds, mask warnings, maybe even a hijacking attempt. Something, anything to explain how the plane had ended up landing alone. When the black boxes were recovered, the team gathered in a sealed analysis room, the walls lined with acoustic shielding, the lights dimmed, the atmosphere tense enough to suffocate. A senior investigator pressed the button to begin playback. The first 20 minutes were normal. Routine chatter, weather updates, banter between pilot and co-pilot, soft cabin noise in the background, passengers settling into their seats. Then, at 34,000 feet, the exact moment the plane went radio silent, it happened. The audio cut out, not slowly, not with distortion, not with static. It stopped instantly, as if someone muted the universe. For 5 full minutes, the recording captured only silence. Pure, absolute silence. Not even the ambient hum of the engines. A sound that should never disappear on a functioning aircraft. Even in an empty cabin, microphones always pick up engine vibration. But here, the engines went silent on audio, while still running perfectly in reality. Then, the cockpit voice recorder captured something impossible. Not voices, not alarms, not human movement. A single sound. A low, deep vibration, rhythmic, pulsing, layered with distorted tones. The investigators called it the presence frequency. It resembled neither mechanical noise nor turbulence. It was too controlled, too patterned, like a heartbeat, but slower, deeper, resonating through something enormous. The sound increased for 7 seconds, then stopped, then returned, stronger, clearer, closer. One investigator dropped his headphones and backed away, shaking. "Turn it off," he whispered. "Turn it off right now." But the analysis continued. At the exact moment the pulsing sound intensified, the cockpit microphone picked up a faint vibration, like movement of air or displacement of mass, directly behind the pilots. Yet no voices, no breathing, no footsteps. Just a feeling of presence recorded through sound waves. The flight data recorder revealed the next horror. At the same moment the strange sound began. Every heart rate monitor and vital signal from every passenger seat froze. All biological telemetry, still. All movement readings, flatline. All oxygen mask triggers, inactive. It was as if every human on the plane had become motionless in the same instant. Not dead, not gone, frozen, paused. Then something even more impossible appeared on the data logs. 3 minutes after the presence frequency started, the cockpit door sensor activated. The door opened. No pilot commanded it. No keycard was used. No override code. The door simply unlocked and swung inward. But the cabin microphone recorded nothing. No footsteps entering. No voices. No breathing. No physical movement. Yet systems reacted. Autopilot disengaged. Altitude corrections applied. Flap adjustments made with perfect precision. It was as if an invisible pilot had taken the controls. Another detail sent agents into panic. The cockpit door never closed again. Yet no turbulence, no wind, no environmental sound from the cabin entered the cockpit mics. It was as if the space beyond the door was no longer a cabin, but a void. When investigators fast-forwarded to the landing sequence, the final revelation shattered every theory. The aircraft's landing inputs, pitch, yaw, descent rate, flare angle, were executed with precision beyond human ability. The landing was not just smooth. It was mathematically flawless. Not even the world's best pilot could execute it so perfectly, down to the millisecond. Machines cannot perform that maneuver. Humans cannot perform that maneuver. But something did. Something that did not speak. something that did not breathe, something that did not leave fingerprints, something that understood flight controls, with an intelligence not learned, but inherent. And then came the final seconds of the cockpit recording. Just before touchdown, 3 words appeared in the audio. Not spoken, not whispered, not human. A faint layered tone, rising out of the deep hum, forming something like a voice, hollow, distant, cold. 3 words. We are here. Then silence, landing, engines idle, nothing else. Investigators froze. Some refused to continue. Others insisted the words were just vibration artifacts. But deep down, every person in that room knew the truth. The plane didn't lose its passengers. It didn't lose its pilots. They were taken in an instant, removed, extracted, or moved somewhere humans cannot follow. Delta 237 did not land empty by accident. It landed that way because whatever entered the plane did not need its passengers anymore. Long before investigators opened the cabin door of Delta Flight 237, the Atlanta airport surveillance team already suspected something was wrong. They had been monitoring the aircraft from the moment it touched down, the smoothest, unpiloted landing ever recorded. And something about the approach didn't look right. Something about the plane's shadow seemed wrong. On the surface, the landing video showed the aircraft gliding in normally, wheels extended, flaps down, descending in perfect alignment with the runway. Everything looked textbook. But when analysts rewound the footage and slowed it down, they noticed a distortion trailing the plane. Not a shadow, not a reflection, not heat shimmer. It was a shape, following slightly behind and below the aircraft, moving in a way no optical artifact could. The shape was dark, amorphous, shifting, like a cloud made of ink and static. It trailed the plane at a distance of roughly 40 to 60 feet, close enough to be unnatural, yet far enough to remain just out of contact. When the aircraft deployed landing gear, the shape elongated. When the plane flared for touchdown, the shape compressed, almost as if reacting. And when the wheels touched the ground, the shape lifted upward, briefly, then vanished. It didn't dissipate, it didn't fade. It blinked out, as though it stepped into a place where cameras could not follow. Security officers were ordered not to speak about the footage. The file was pulled from the airport servers within 10 minutes and replaced with a clean version showing no anomaly. But among the security staff, whispers spread. Some called it a distortion. Others called it a shadow creature. A few, the ones who watched closely, believed it was entering the aircraft midair. As investigators tried to find answers on the ground, the mystery inside the aircraft grew darker. When they entered the cabin, the first thing they noticed was the temperature. It was cold, far colder than the environmental system settings should allow, colder than the outside air during landing. The seats were icy to the touch, the windows frosted at the edges. Breath came out in pale clouds. Planes don't turn into freezers without system failure. Yet every onboard system reported normal temperature, as if the cold wasn't created by machinery, but by the absence of something. A vacuum of warmth, a vacuum of life. The aisle was filled with abandoned belongings, jackets, headphones, half-unzipped bags, a baby's blanket on seat 21A, a laptop still open on an email draft. The investigators moved slowly, each step sounding too loud in the unnatural silence. Even their radios crackled strangely, like something was suppressing their range. And then they found the first impossible detail. Every seatbelt was unbuckled, every single one. But they were arranged neatly across laps, as if passengers had unbuckled simultaneously, without panic, without standing, without moving. Their drinks were still on tray tables. Their books were still open to the last read page. One cup of coffee was still warm. The people didn't leave. They didn't run. They didn't struggle. They simply ceased to exist. Investigators moved to the rear galley next, expecting the same emptiness. But what they found instead was far worse. The rear galley door, the one connected to the external service hatch, was covered in fingerprints, hundreds of them, but not human ones. They were too long, too thin, too curved. Some prints had 6 digits, some had 3. Some spiraled outward like the imprint of a tentacle. Others looked like claws without tips, as if they never touched the surface fully, just grazed it. The prints glowed faintly under UV light, not like biological residue, but like radiation. The leading investigator swallowed hard. "Contain the aircraft," he said. "Now." They moved toward the cockpit next, but the cockpit held a truth worse than anything in the passenger cabin. On the floor near the captain's chair was a single object, a shoe. But not just any shoe, a captain's shoe, still tied, still polished, with no foot inside it, just the shoe, perfectly intact, like the foot inside it had never existed. Investigators recoiled, and that was when the second black box, the flight data recorder, revealed the next horror. At 34,000 feet, radar detected another object flying with the plane. Not above it, not below it, beside it, close enough to touch. But radar couldn't define it. It wasn't metal. It wasn't aircraft-shaped. It wasn't matching transponder frequencies. It wasn't reflecting signals in any known pattern. It was like radar pinged a hole in the sky. An absence of matter, a void moving at 500 mph beside a commercial plane. Air traffic control called it object echo, because everything they knew about radar told them the object should not exist. And then, as quickly as it appeared, echo vanished. But exactly 8 seconds after echo disappeared, the passengers vanished too, as though whatever traveled beside the aircraft entered it. Investigators wanted to see inside the luggage hold next, but when they opened the compartment, they found something that ended all further exploration for the day. A suitcase had been sliced open from the inside. No blade marks, no tearing, no burning. Just a perfect crescent-like cut, as if made by pressure or force. But from within the luggage, not from outside. Clothes lay untouched. Electronics were gone. Every metallic object, keys, watches, chargers, zippers, had disappeared. Evaporated, removed, extracted. As if something aboard the plane collected metal, like it was gathering parts, or feeding on conductivity, or preparing something no one wanted to imagine. And then the final discovery came when investigators reached the oxygen mask panel. One of the masks had deployed, but not fallen downward normally. It had been pulled upward toward the ceiling, as if something above the passengers was reaching down. When investigators finished their first pass through the aircraft, everyone assumed the worst was already behind them. The empty cabin, the strange fingerprints, the untouched belongings, the shoe without a foot, the radar anomaly, the presence frequency in the black box. They believed the nightmare was contained inside the fuselage, a mystery locked in metal and silence. They were wrong. The nightmare was underneath. Before the plane could be moved from the runway to the secure hangar, a routine inspection team crawled beneath the belly of the aircraft to check for structural damage. They expected the usual. A few scuffs, tire debris, maybe hydraulic fluid trails. What they found instead was something no one could explain. A thin line, perfectly straight, perfectly symmetrical, ran the entire length of the aircraft's underside. Not a scratch, not a crack, not a dent. A scar, a mark, as if something had been attached to the belly of the plane during flight and released only moments before landing. The line was cold to the touch, ice cold, despite the hot asphalt below. And when investigators ran a thermal camera across it, the mark absorbed heat rather than reflected it. The thermal signature was not black, but void-like, a temperature reading lower than measurable limits, as if a shadow had left a footprint. The inspection team reported the anomaly. 15 minutes later, Federal Security locked down the entire area. The plane was towed into Hangar C-19, a restricted building used only for classified aviation investigations. Inside the hangar, the aircraft's lights flickered, as if responding to an unseen presence. Ground crew whispered to each other, "Something is still on that plane." The hangar was sealed. Only a handful of investigators were allowed inside. The infrared footage, around 1:40 a.m., as investigators reviewed the black boxes and passenger logs. A junior technician monitoring the hangar's infrared cameras yelled for the team lead. Something was moving inside the aircraft. The regular cameras showed nothing. Total stillness. Empty cabin, dark aisle, motionless seats. But on the infrared feed, a shape glowed faintly. It moved slowly, drifting from row to row, like a person walking down the aisle. Except its body was too tall, its limbs too long, its temperature unreadable. The figure flickered in and out of visibility, like it existed halfway between matter and air. It was not human, not heat-based, not cold-based, just an outline of something tall and wrong. The figure paused at row 12, leaning, observing, as if smelling the air. Then it drifted upward, not climbing, not stepping, rising vertically through the cabin, as though gravity had no authority over it. The technician froze. The figure's head turned sharply toward the infrared camera, and for half a second, the screen glowed bright. Not with white heat, not with red, with pure black. A total absence of thermal energy, a living void. Then, the figure disappeared into the ceiling. The technicians stared in horror. They hit rewind, but the video file glitched violently every time the figure appeared. Pixels tore, frames corrupted, audio hissed, as if the shape interfered with the recording simply by existing. But they saw one detail clearly. The figure did not walk. It floated. It slid. It drifted between physical and non-physical states. And most chilling of all, it had returned to the plane. Hours after landing, after the passengers vanished, after the presence boarded mid-air, it came back. The footprints that appeared. Investigators rushed inside the hangar with handheld thermal scanners. They moved cautiously toward the aircraft door. The plane sat silent, engines cold, lights dim, but the air felt wrong, heavy, pressurized, like walking into a room where something massive had just exhaled. At the boarding door, a security officer froze. Marks were on the floor, footprints, but not human ones, not symmetrical, not natural. Long, stretched impressions with strange branching patterns, as if toes extended into tendrils. The prints glowed faintly when exposed to UV light, as if coated with some organic residue unknown to science. The prints weren't walking toward the door. They were walking away from it. Something had exited the plane. The group followed the footprints across the hangar floor. The tracks moved toward the back wall, and then stopped abruptly, mid-stride, as if the being had evaporated or stepped into an unseen doorway. No exit, no ladder, no vent, no tool marks, nothing. Just disappearance. The auditory event. At 2:27 a.m., the hangar lights flickered violently. One after another, the overhead lamps buzzed, dimmed, then surged with white-hot intensity. Investigators shielded their eyes. And then the sound returned. Low, deep, vibrating through the metal beams. The same presence frequency captured on the black box, but louder, clearer, more deliberate. It wasn't a hum. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't machinery. It was a communication. Every radio in the hangar crackled. Every metal tool vibrated. Every phone screen glitched with static patterns that resembled symbols, loops, spirals, interlocking arcs. A pattern. The presence was sending a message. The senior investigator shouted, "Shut it all off! Shut everything!" Then came the second sound. A gasp. Soft. Human. It echoed from inside the plane. Every investigator spun toward the aircraft. Someone, or something, had drawn breath inside the empty cabin, a breath not recorded before, a breath not human in rhythm, a breath impossibly deep and long. The presence was no longer behind the pilots, no longer outside the fuselage, no longer drifting through the hangar. It was inside the plane again, watching, breathing, listening, and this time, it wasn't alone. Thermal sensors detected 3 shapes inside the cabin, then 6, then 9, all tall, all slender, all void black on infrared, as if the plane had become a gathering place for entities that followed it from the sky. And then, the black box activated again, by itself. No power, no cockpit input, no engineer touching it. The voice, the one that wasn't human, returned. 3 words again, clearer, louder, layered with multiple tones now, like several beings speaking at once. "We are here." Everything went dark. When the lights inside Hangar C-19 went dark after the entity's final broadcast, the silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It felt heavy, like the air itself was listening. Every investigator froze in place, too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe. Emergency lights flickered faintly along the ceiling, throwing long, trembling shadows across the empty 737. Except it wasn't empty anymore. Thermal scanners showed 9 shapes inside the cabin, then 10, then 12. Each shape standing upright in the aisle, facing forward, perfectly still, as if waiting. Then the shapes began to change. They thinned, elongated, darkened, becoming sharper silhouettes, almost humanoid, almost ghost-like, almost real. And then, slowly, they stepped backward, not walking, not sliding, not floating, stepping backward into the seats, fading, blending, dissolving, as if they were merging with the cabin, as if the plane itself was absorbing them, or as if the plane was showing investigators something. One investigator whispered, shaking, "Are those the passengers?" Another whispered back, voice breaking, "No, those are what took the passengers." The shapes dissolved completely. The plane returned to stillness. The air stopped vibrating. And then, for the first time since the aircraft landed, something moved. A luggage compartment at row 21 snapped open. Not slowly, not randomly. Snapped open like someone struck it from inside. Investigators raised their lights cautiously. Inside the compartment was a single object. A phone. A passenger's phone. Still powered on. Still recording. It had been recording for 2 hours and 7 minutes. They hit play. The video began with turbulence, a jolt, a rumble, passengers murmuring, seatbelts tightening. Then the recording went quiet, but not blank. The cabin filled with a low, bone-deep vibration, the same presence frequency, heard in the black box. The video warped, shaking like the phone was being pulled through invisible gravity. Shapes appeared at the edges of the screen, tall, thin, bending unnaturally as they moved. Their outlines flickered like shadows in burning light. Then, suddenly, every passenger in view froze. Not fainting, not collapsing, not screaming, freezing, eyes open, mouths parted, faces slack, still breathing, but frozen. Then the presence moved closer. The camera shimmered. Reality bent. The screen filled with a shape that could not be described. Not fully physical, not fully shadow. Tendrils of darkness extended toward passengers' faces. Not touching, scanning, reading, pulling something from them. Light, warmth, consciousness, identity. Whatever these things were, they weren't killing passengers. They were taking something from inside them. Not bodies, but something deeper. And then, the recording changed completely. Every passenger vanished. Not in a flash, not in smoke, not in light. They blinked out, one by one, row by row, gone. Seats empty, belts unbuckled, objects left behind. The presence pulsed once more. and the screen showed nothing but static. The recording ended. Investigators stood in stunned silence. The truth was undeniable. The passengers were not dead. They were taken, removed from the physical world, extracted, shifted, moved somewhere else, somewhere these entities existed, somewhere humans cannot return from. Then came the most horrifying discovery of all: the final sweep. After recovering the phone, investigators performed one final infrared sweep of the cabin. At first, the feed showed nothing. Then shapes appeared. Not entities, not shadows, not figures, faces. Dozens of faces pressed faintly against the cabin walls. Human faces, eyes wide, mouths open, frozen in expressions of terror and confusion. The passengers. They weren't removed from the plane physically. They were trapped between dimensions, half-phased into the metal, the plastic, the insulation. The plane was their prison and their grave. As the investigators watched, the faces slowly faded until they disappeared completely, like a memory being erased. The lead investigator whispered the only words that captured the nightmare. "They're still here, but not in a way we can save." The government intervention. Within 48 minutes of the discovery, the hangar was overrun with federal agents. All footage seized, all investigators silenced, all digital devices destroyed, all personnel reassigned. Delta Flight 237 was declared a hazardous biological quantum anomaly and moved to Site Echo, a hidden Nevada desert compound used for classified aerospace incidents. The aircraft remains sealed there today. No one has touched it since. No one has entered it. No one has tried to bring the passengers back. Because the final analysis made one thing clear: whatever took those people wasn't done. It was scouting, testing, preparing. And Delta 237 was the first successful extraction. The last official note written in the classified report was simple: do not allow it to happen again. They will return. And the most chilling detail? A month later, another aircraft, Flight 908, reported a strange, dark shape following it at 34,000 feet. But before air traffic control responded, the object vanished. The silence returned, just like before.